The End of History and the Last Man by Francis Fukuyama is a seminal work in political philosophy that was published in 1992. In this extensive summary, I'll delve into the key themes, arguments, and implications presented by Fukuyama in his exploration of the post-Cold War world and the ideological evolution of human societies. Introduction: The Post-Cold War World. The book begins by examining the global political landscape following the end of the Cold War. Fukuyama contends that with the fall of the Soviet Union, humanity has reached a historic moment where liberal democracy has emerged as the victor in the ideological struggle against communism. He introduces the notion that liberal democracy represents the end of history, not in the sense of the cessation of events but as the final stage in the evolution of human political systems. Hegel's influence, the march of history. Fukuyama draws heavily on the philosophy of G.W.F. Hegel, particularly the idea of the march of history and the dialectical process leading to the establishment of a universal state embodying principles of freedom and reason. He argues that Hegel's vision of historical progression has found fulfillment in liberal democracy. The triumph of liberal democracy. Francis Fukuyama argues that liberal democracy has won against other ideologies and political systems primarily through the lens of historical evolution and the outcome of the ideological struggles that characterized the 20th century. Here are key points from his perspective. 1. The collapse of communism. Fukuyama asserts that the decisive moment in the victory of liberal democracy occurred with the collapse of communism and the disintegration of the Soviet Union. He views this event as the culmination of the ideological struggle between liberal democracy and its major rival, communism. 2. The failure of alternatives. The author contends that liberal democracy triumphed not only because of the failure of communism, but also due to the inadequacy and shortcomings of alternative political systems. He argues that other ideological contenders, such as fascism and authoritarianism, have proven to be unsustainable or morally bankrupt. 3. Inherent attractiveness of liberal values. Fukuyama suggests that liberal values, such as individual freedom, human rights, and representative democracy, possess inherent attractiveness. He posits that people around the world are increasingly recognizing the appeal of these principles, contributing to the global spread of liberal democratic ideals. 4. End of ideological struggle. With the end of the Cold War, Fukuyama argues that the ideological struggle has reached its conclusion. He contends that liberal democracy emerged as the default ideology, not only because of its own merits, but also due to the failure of its rivals. This, in his view, marks the end of history in terms of ideological competition. 5. Universalization of Western values. Fukuyama explores the idea that liberal democracy is not confined to the Western world, but is becoming universally accepted. He suggests that the global spread of Western values is indicative of their adaptability and applicability to diverse cultural contexts. 6. Economic success of market capitalism. The success of market capitalism, which is closely associated with liberal democracy, plays a significant role in Fukuyama's argument. He contends that the economic prosperity generated by market-driven systems contributes to the attractiveness and endurance of liberal democracy. 7. Hegel's dialectical process. Fukuyama draws heavily on the philosophy of Hegel, particularly the dialectical process leading to the establishment of a universal state. He sees liberal democracy as the fulfillment of Hegel's vision of a political system embodying freedom and reason. 8. Democratic peace theory. Fukuyama incorporates elements of the democratic peace theory, suggesting that democracies are less likely to engage in conflicts with each other. He argues that the global spread of liberal democracy may contribute to a more peaceful world order. 9. Historical progression. Fukuyama's perspective is deeply rooted in a belief in historical progression. He sees the development of political systems as a journey toward an endpoint, where liberal democracy represents the highest form of governance achieved through the lessons of history. While Fukuyama presents a compelling case for the triumph of liberal democracy, it's important to note that his thesis has faced criticism and debate. Critics argue that subsequent events have challenged the idea of a clear and uncontested victory for liberal democracy, citing the rise of illiberal regimes and geopolitical complexities. Nonetheless, Fukuyama's perspective has left a lasting impact on discussions about the trajectory of political systems and the evolution of human governance. The end of ideological struggle. With the collapse of communism and the end of the Cold War, Fukuyama argues that liberal democracy has become the default ideology. He contends that ideological struggle has reached its conclusion, and liberal democracy is the only viable system left standing. This, in essence, marks the end of history in terms of ideological competition. Universalization of Western values. Fukuyama explores the idea that liberal democracy and the accompanying values of individual freedom and human rights are not confined to the Western world, but are becoming universal. He suggests that other cultures and societies are increasingly recognizing the attractiveness and effectiveness of these principles. In The End of History and the Last Man, Francis Fukuyama explores the concept of the globalization of Western values as a significant aspect of the triumph of liberal democracy. Here are key points on how the book explains this phenomenon. 1. Cultural appeal of liberal values. Fukuyama argues that the values associated with liberal democracy, such as individual freedom, human rights, and representative governance, possess a universal cultural appeal. He suggests that these values resonate not only within Western societies, but also across diverse cultural contexts. 2. Universal aspirations. The book contends that the aspirations embedded in liberal democratic values, such as the desire for political freedom and individual rights, are universal. Fukuyama suggests that people worldwide share common human aspirations that align with the principles of liberal democracy. 3. Moral authority of Western values. Fukuyama explores the moral authority of Western values, contending that the West's historical experiences and struggles for liberty have endowed these values with a compelling moral dimension. He suggests that the moral authority of Western values contributes to their global influence. 4. Success of Western democracies. The success of Western democracies, both economically and politically, is seen as a driving force behind the globalization of Western values. Fukuyama argues that the prosperity and stability experienced by Western nations showcase the advantages of liberal democracy and contribute to its attractiveness worldwide. 5. Technological and informational advances. Fukuyama acknowledges the role of technological and informational advances in facilitating the spread of Western values. The global dissemination of information, ideas, and images, often driven by advancements in communication technologies, plays a crucial role in shaping perceptions and aspirations. 6. The end of ideological struggle. With the end of the Cold War and the ideological struggle against communism, Fukuyama suggests that liberal democracy emerged as the default ideology. This, he argues, opened up opportunities for the globalization of Western values as the dominant political and ideological paradigm. 7. Liberal democracy as a model. The book presents liberal democracy as a model that other societies aspire to emulate. Fukuyama suggests that the success and adaptability of liberal democratic systems make them a template for governance, with other nations seeking to incorporate elements of Western political institutions. 8. Influence of international organizations. International organizations and institutions that champion liberal democratic values, such as the United Nations, are discussed as influential agents in the globalization of Western values. Fukuyama suggests that these institutions contribute to the dissemination and promotion of democratic principles on a global scale. 9. Economic globalization and market capitalism. The economic dimension is crucial in Fukuyama's explanation of globalization. The success of market capitalism, often associated with liberal democracy, is seen as a powerful driver of globalization. Economic interconnectedness fosters the exchange of goods, ideas, and values across borders. 10. Soft power and cultural influence. The concept of soft power, which refers to the ability to influence through attraction and persuasion rather than coercion, is relevant to Fukuyama's explanation. He argues that Western cultural products, such as literature, films, and media, contribute to the dissemination of Western values globally. It's important to note that while Fukuyama presents the globalization of Western values as a phenomenon, his thesis has faced criticism. Critics argue that cultural diversity and resistance to Westernization challenge the idea of a seamless spread of liberal democratic values. Nonetheless, the book remains influential in discussions about the global impact of Western political ideals. The challenge of boredom, the last man. As Fukuyama delves into the implications of the end of history, he introduces the concept of the last man. This figure represents individuals in liberal democracies who have achieved material prosperity.